guys, it's Devin Moreno here, and welcome to the Baltimore Investors channel. And today I wanted to go ahead and talk to you about something that my team does to acquire lots of housing and also live for free. And that method is commonly called house hacking. It's a way to use a primary residency loan in order to purchase a house for cheap and then rent out portions of it in order to cover the entire mortgage and live completely for free. This is something that I've been doing for years. I haven't paid rent or mortgage in years. And it is a really effective method to also start investing. This is something that I highly recommend for a lot of people just starting out. It allows you to, like I said, low down payments, 3 to 5%, where normally you'd have to pay 20 to 25%. And it makes it much more affordable. Keep in mind though, this is not one of those, get a house for free. You have to be prepared for the maintenance. You have to be prepared for certain renovations. Some of these houses actually require, or these styles of house hacking require more renovation than others. But even regardless of the amount of renovation, you still have to treat this like a business. It is a business. You're gonna be dealing with tenants. You have to understand how to do that. You have to understand how to deal with the paperwork involved in the act of purchasing a house. So it's not necessarily an easy method, but in the world of investing, it would be considered one of the beginner's best ways of getting into it. This is something my team specializes in. We're a team of 5 guys, some of us doing live and flips. I know I do room rentals quite a bit. I also do what I call duplex conversions, which I'll get into. And all my partners are also realtors, so we find and sell house hacks quite often, or houses that could be used as a house hack, because not all of them are eligible. So today I'm going to go ahead and do a brief overview on these 6 types of house hack. Now there's many different variations of these 6 types, but these are the main categories that we like to place them into. So some of these categories are not our own. There are other groups that talk about these, but these are also just the way we kind of group them up. So the first one I want to get into is the traditional house hack, or the multifamily house hack. So this is the one that everyone thinks of when they say house hack. It's the one that everyone wants to do, which is you get a 2 to 4 unit house, got to be below 5 units because of residential real estate is what's required for this. So 2 to 4 unit house, and you live in one unit and you rent out the other ones. Most people who know house hacking tend to know this one. So this is the easiest one to actually start off in. So let's look at the pros on this one, just a few quick pros. So one, it starts you off with an apartment complex. So now you've already begun your investing career with an apartment complex. That is already great to say. It means it's easy to move out. With these house hacks, oftentimes you're moving out within 6 months to a year and a half, somewhere in that time frame, depending on what loan you've used in financing options. But once you've moved out, you just rent your last unit and you're done. You can wipe your hands of it. You can easily put any type of tenant pretty much into most of these after obviously a detailed background credit check. But you're going to see the tenants you can place in this house are less stringent than the ones that you need for the other types of house hacking. So this one is also scalable. So what that means is basically when you move out of your house hack and try to get another one, your loan officer is often going to ask you why you're moving. You need a justification. It's very easy to justify moving from an apartment complex to another apartment complex in a different area, or more often so, an apartment complex to a normal house, a townhouse or a single family home. It seems like an upgrade. So it's almost always justifiable, it's easy to prove, and so that's one of the wonderful things about it. And then it's the easiest one to manage by far, longer term tenants, and it is a true investment property. So the problems with it, I mean, obviously with all those pros, this is expensive and rare due to high competition. So because everyone knows about these, you are dealing with a lot more competition with it, which is meaning the values are going up and most of them are way overpriced. Also, another con about these is they're often in areas zoned for 2 to 4 units, which means they're in less desirable areas most often. They're often going to be in a little harsher areas sometimes. Sometimes they're not going to be in areas you want to live. And because they're harder to find, even if they are in areas you want to live, they're going to be so outpriced that it's going to be difficult to work with them. Sometimes they're harder to negotiate because the sellers are often investors. So they often negotiate really high, knowing that a lot of newbies like to take these houses as their first type of investment. So sometimes when you do the math on them, it doesn't even work. You could rent out all the units and it still doesn't cash flow. So you really got to do your math on those ones, and you just know they are much, much harder to find. So let's go into the next type of house hacking, which is actually one of my favorite ones, is the room sharing house hack. Now this one I actually was completely dreaded against when I first started. The idea of having 4 to 5 roommates in a single house living together just sounded like nuts to me, but it actually is one of the easier ones to manage once you kind of have it down to a system, which I go into in a lot of other videos. So definitely stay tuned for that, or look at the older ones that I have. So the best part about these houses is they are easy to find. They're everywhere. Pretty much you're just looking for a single family home. In fact, you're often getting homes that investors can't even touch, because most of the time you can't refinance or cash out or anything to get your money back. So they're just money pits to normal investors. But to you, using a low down payment and such, it's very easy to make your money back. Your ROI is almost always 80 to 90% on these houses. So they also bring in the most money. So an average house hack is generally going to bring around $3,000 to $4,000 plus. That might sound absurd, but if you think about it, a room is often priced just under a studio price of the area. So, and generally capping at the lowest at around $600. So if you think of just $600 itself and multiply that by 4 to 5 rooms, you can already see where this money starts to come in. Now, if you look at an area like DC, which is where I'm at, or even Baltimore, but let's go with DC, the average studio price in DC is going to be like $1,300 in some areas, most areas that are not way too crazy. So rooms are not far behind. So generally you get a room for about like $1,000. So multiply that by 3, 4, 5 rooms, and you can see where I'm going with this. So they're also never 100% vacant. Because you have the house broken down into multiple different sections, the tenants, when they leave, it's very easy to fill it and move on. You're almost never 100% vacant. At most, generally about 2 rooms vacant at any time. So the problem with these, they're harder to manage. Obviously, you have shared resources, common areas, shared utilities. You also have to share the house. So you need tenants who get along. So that's another con about it. You got to be more selective on your tenants. You can't just put anyone into this house. And even if you do put like a great young professional who loves the area and is you know, just everything you're looking for, you got to kind of make sure that their lifestyle doesn't conflict too heavily with other lifestyles. So that's something just to keep in mind about there. They also are higher turnover. Now, they're on smaller spaces, so the cleaning is a lot less stringent as some of the other ones, but the turnover is pretty quick. Oftentimes, people who rent rooms are not looking to stay for 5 years. They're generally looking to stay for 1 or 2 years. Sometimes, if you get really, really lucky, you can get more, but oftentimes, that's about the best you're gonna get out of them. So that's my spiel on room sharing houses. Like I said, go into full detail about those in future videos. Duplex conversions, that's actually what I'm in right now filming this video. So a duplex conversion is where you find a house with like another entrance. It generally have 2 or more entrances to the house and can be divided up in such a way where you can cut the house in half and actually turn it into almost a duplex. Keep in mind about zoning laws and restrictions regarding this. So oftentimes it's more common that what you're gonna see is like you turn it into almost like a mother-in-law suite. So you cut it in half, not in half perfectly, but maybe into 1/4, you take a chunk out of it and you live in that 1/4 part, and the other 3/4 of the house you give to the tenant. So then you rent it to a family and they take over the rent and they pay the mortgage. So with these, they're cheaper than duplexes, but and more available, but they cash flow exactly the same. So the important part about that is the fact that when you find these on the MLS, they're not marketed as multifamilies. They're just happen to be places where if you're lucky, they'll say in-law suite or casita or something like that. But for the most part, they're not going to advertise, hey, I have a second door that you can turn this into. Generally, you're buying from a family. So oftentimes the sale is going to be a little bit more emotional, not as advertised to an investor. So they're more available on the market for that reason. You can often find them in nicer areas, so that's always great. They also need usually minimal renovation. Oftentimes you got to get something that splits them in half, and then you just have to figure out how to build a kitchenette. Your average kitchenette probably costs you, I mean, this is going to get real tricky to even price depending on your area and such, but around here it's going to be like $5,000 to install all the cabinetry, all the plumbing, and everything I need for a kitchenette. So Let's go into the cons of these types of things. HVAC, plumbing, and electrical can be problematic. They can ruin your house hack. So sometimes, let's say I want to divide the house in half. Well, if you cut the ductwork in half in order to close it all off and separate out the heating and cooling systems, you might end up creating problems because your ductwork was not sized for only half of your square footage. This can also become a problem with your electrical. One unit will have the circuit breaker and the other unit won't. Now, that's not really that big a deal, which I'll cover in later videos, but you have to think about things like that. The plumbing, sometimes the bathrooms and such are not in the proper places in order to actually make a kitchenette the way you need to, and you always have to be thinking of your exit strategy. So you don't want to just arbitrarily start building kitchens in places where they won't make any sense when you want to sell. So they're also costlier to modify than the other two we just mentioned. Now, they're less costly than the future ones I'm going to talk about, but they are more costly because you often have to build a kitchenette and separate out the heating in some way so that they have their own. And zoning can be an issue. Keep in mind, these aren't legal duplexes, which means when you try to leave them, you often have to be a little creative with the way that you rent your side. If you end up giving 1/4 to yourself, then that can be like an Airbnb unit or a storage or whatever you want to turn it into. In my case, I intend to rent by the room, so therefore I'm still there. There's a number of different ways that you have to play with this, but just keep in mind about that zoning issue. So as far as the next one, we get into vacation rentals. So vacation rentals is basically the same thing as a duplex conversion, but with the opposite strategy in mind. So normally you want to give the larger part of the house to the tenant. Well, in this case, you're actually giving the smaller part of the house to the tenant. The reason why is because you're turning that smaller part into a vacation rental that you're going to modify to look very, very nice. You want it to look very, very nice because it's a vacation rental, obviously. So you're competing with other vacation rentals. And normally people looking for vacation rentals are looking for a very nice place. They're using like side income. It's income they could throw away, disposable income, to rent this space. So you must be competitive. You might find that putting more money into the look of the place will actually net you more in the long term than it will just being cheap. So in this model, it's actually very, very good for families, people with kids. I often recommend it to those types, anyone trying to invest but then has to bring their whole family with them. So that way you can go to nice areas and rent out the bottom section, let's say a basement or something like that, and then put it on Airbnb. And because renting it by the room naturally makes more money than renting out by the month, renting out by the day makes more money than renting out by the month. That means you generally can make up the mortgage despite the fact that you're renting for less periods of time. You have higher turnovers. So let's go into the cons of this. It's obvious. There's a lot more turnover and a lot more management. So the tenants are really, really easy to find, especially if you're in the right neighborhoods, but you have to do cleaning and all that stuff. So it's almost a room sharing house common area, but with a much, much more frequent cleaning. So just keep that in mind when you deal with these. You are looking at essentially a hotel business that you're running. The next thing is it's expensive to modify. As I mentioned, you often want to spend more materials to make it a proper vacation rental. And then you have the limited vacation destinations. Here's the thing. When you make a vacation rental, you can't just put it in North Dakota and call it a day. You're going to have to move somewhere where people want to vacation to. So I live in DC, so it is very easy to vacation where I am. But you just have to evaluate that in your own market. Sometimes these aren't possible to build in your area. So let's go into the next one. This one we have the least experience in, and that is the guest house, also called an accessory dwelling unit. These are interesting because it's almost a house that's built next to your actual house. Now, I don't have a lot of experience there, so I'm not going to go into these, but oftentimes, yes, the separation makes them desirable, but it is sometimes hard to actually separate them if it hasn't been done for you. Also, the more tricky part is the zoning and the laws. Make sure you're allowed to build one of these structures. Just because you have land does not mean you can suddenly build another dwelling unit, that you can often be torn down because you didn't follow the law and regulation on that. So, and then the last one I'm going to get into, which is one that my group highly does a lot, is the live and flip. So the live and flip is actually like more of a flip that you just live in, obviously, but it gives you more flexible financing options for this version. So in the other versions, you generally have to go to a bank, but in this version, you could use personal or hard money lending, less so hard money because you're gonna have to stay in it for 2 years, which I'll get into, but you can use more flexible spending. There's also the 203K loan, which allows you to fund the renovations on the project. But essentially, you're buying something that you wouldn't live in at first. You'd renovate it and then turn it into something and then sell it in 2 years in order to utilize the capital gains tax advantage, the loophole, well, not a loophole, but it's a tax exemption for that. So what's the great parts about this? One, high equity. It's higher equity than all the other methods I've just mentioned. The high equity comes from the fact that you are forced appreciating the home, whereas the other methods, you're often buying something that already looks good. There isn't any appreciation. That's why you're not really competing with other actual investors who have been in this game for a little while, because they can't renovate. They can't make any forced value in there. The other thing is you have options on how you want to rent it out. So in all the other home strategies, you have to find it exactly the way that it needs to be. In this one, you can just build it the way you need it to be. And so oftentimes, if like you and your wife or husband want to move into the house and you want the bigger portion, well, you can renovate it so that the electrical panel is on the bottom and the top floor, and therefore you can rent out the bottom and be completely separated from your tenants. And I do have a friend, one of my partners is actually doing a live and flip. He makes his entire mortgage on just Airbnb-ing his bottom section, and he renovated it to do that. The best part about doing that is it makes them more marketable during the flip. Now, the thing is, if you don't actually decide to rent it, this is where the living for free part kind of gets a little weird, because now you're fronting the money for 2 years until you sell and then make the money back. So obviously you're waiting 2 years to get your free living. And so, and yeah, of course you'll make a profit on top of that. So that's something to note about that. Also, because you got to wait 2 years, you're a victim to market forces. If the market suddenly tanks in 2 years, which is very possible, then you can do nothing about it. And you have to make sure you have multiple different exit strategies where you can rent it out as well. So anyway, guys, that's the 6 types of house hacks. I'm gonna do lots of videos on every single one of these, not only how to build them, how to manage them, how to check if they could be zoned properly for them, all of that. So just let me know in the comments section below which ones you guys have the most interest in, and I'll definitely cover those in all my future videos. Thanks for watching.